Hello, hello, beautiful people. This is Stephanie Salamatu. Now, I need to talk about something that's been sitting heavy on my chest lately. Right now in South Africa, Africans are being hunted in the streets, not by strangers from faraway land, but by other Africans. Let me be clear. Black Africans are being hunted in South Africa by Black South Africans. Now, I'm just going to kind of go back. Recently, we had a few, more than a few, African nations who qualified for the World Cup. And we saw a lot of the support by Africans, whether they were on the continent or they were abroad, who were showing support to other teams, the opposite teams that were playing in South Africa. A friend of mine, an American friend, noticed this because it's been all on social media. For example, South Africa was playing Mexico, and most of the Africans, just about all of the Africans from other African countries, were cheering for Mexico and not South Africa. So my American friend asked me, said, "What is going on? I'm noticing a trend that, there are a lot of Africans who are just against South Africa." I said, "Well, there's something that's been happening in South Africa that many, many, many Africans are not happy about." And that's what's been on my chest. So, like I said, Africans are being hunted in the streets of South Africa by other South Africans. In the rest of the continent, whether you are an African who's living on the continent or you're living abroad, we're watching it happen in real time. This isn't rumor. This isn't social media exaggeration. This is documented. This is reported. This is confirmed by several human rights organizations. And of course, social media. We're watching this on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok in real time. So let's talk about it. Since April of this year, South Africa has seen one of its worst waves of xenophobic violence in over a decade. There are groups going around. There are Black South African groups going door to door, stopping people in the streets, demanding papers. They've even killed migrants from Nigeria, Ethiopia, and elsewhere. Five Ethiopian migrants were killed in a single string of attack in Johannesburg. Three of them were shot inside a restaurant. I believe the restaurant was McDonald's. Nigerian nationals have died after encounters with security personnel. Businesses, especially Nigerian, Ghanaian, and Malawian owned, have been shut down, they've been looted, and they've been burned. And some of these businesses that they're destroying actually employs Black South Africans. And, sidebar, I keep saying Black South Africans because if you know anything about Africa, you have the Black South Africans who are Black people, and you have a white population, and they're known as Afrikaners. I think that's it, Afrikaners. So I'm stressing that the people who are hunting the Black migrants are not the Afrikaners. They're not the white South Africans. These are the Black South Africans who are doing this. So as a result, Nigeria, Ghana, Malawi, what they're doing is trying to get their citizens out of the country. And I believe Nigeria and Ghana they've gotten a lot of people out of the country. Right now, as we speak, more than 3,000 Malawians are sleeping in an open field in Durban because they were too afraid to go to their own homes. Imagine. Human Rights Watch, this human rights organization, has documented the xenophobic groups blocking foreign nationals from hospitals and school. And this is not even a human rights group documented. we are seeing this on social media, and a lot of these videos are being posted by the very people who are causing harm to other people. And it's so strange to me because I'm like, do they think this is a good look for them? Anyway, but I'll take a sidebar and let me tell you about the word uh, xenophobic. So the first time I heard this word, I was actually in high school, and the word was used during a story that came out of South Africa. This was in the mid 90s. I think it was like mid 90s. I know I was in high school. And the story was that there was this wave of xenophobia in South Africa. This black South African guy had thrown a black African migrant off a moving train. And I'm stressing black, just so you know that it's not the other people, that us that are doing it. That's why I'm stressing it. So anyway, they threw the guy off the train, and the reason was they had this fear that there were a lot of migrants coming to the country and they were taking their jobs. So moving forward, every time I would hear that word, I really thought it was a South African thing. I thought it was just South Africa because every time there was a story, that word was used. Now, the xenophobia is the fear or the intense dislike of people perceived as foreigners or strangers. Now, I know this is a Greek word, but again, growing up, I really thought this was, when you said xenophobic, South Africa. But of course, as you get older and you learn, you're a little bit more exposed. You learn that, okay, it's not really unique to South Africa. However, I will say, here's what makes this different from 2008, 2015, or even 2019, because it continued to happen. We saw similar cases in South Africa. In some cases, it was deadlier. Waves of the same kind of violence. We're not hearing about it secondhand anymore. We're watching it in real time on our phones, the videos, the testimonies, the funerals. Social media did not create this hatred. It took away the distance that used to let it happen quietly. Now I want to be careful here. Hear me out. Every country has the right to manage who is in their borders and how people got in the borders. Immigration law exists for a reason, and no one is saying that nations shouldn't be allowed to enforce their own laws. That part isn't in dispute. But there's a world of difference between enforcing immigration law and mob violence. Between deportation and a man being beaten to death in the streets, every human being, documented or not, citizen or not, deserves due process. Every human being, documented or not, citizen or not, deserves to be treated like a human being before the law decides what happens to them. What's happening in South Africa right now is not law enforcement. It's a group of xenophobic people deciding on site who gets to live in peace. And it's not foreigners broadly. Let's not soften, we're trying to soften and make it sound sweet. Oh, it's about the foreigners, it's about the foreigners. It's not foreigners, and we shouldn't be vague about it. This is specifically targeting Black African migrants, mostly from West Africa. Nigerians, Ghanaians, I hear you Malawians down, there, but, I'm just saying, we're seeing a lot more Nigerians and Ghanaians. People who, in many cases, are fully documented, who run legitimate businesses, who employ South Africans. Oh, no, let me be specific. Who employ Black South Africans, who have built lives there in South Africa. Now they've been told, sometimes at gunpoint, to leave. And through all of this, the response from the South African government has felt too much of the continent like silence. They're not saying anything. Or what they're doing, they have statements condemning these acts. They have phone calls between foreign ministries. They have the Freedom Day speech invoking African solidarity. But the Nigerian government has openly accused South Africa of failing to forcefully denounce the violence. We haven't seen South Africa forcefully denounce the violence. And Ghana actually took the same stance. And they requested a debate at the African Union to talk about this. We know there are human rights monitors who are describing the police response as inconsistent at best. When people are dying and the loudest response is a diplomatic memo, that silence is its own kind of message. Here's the part nobody is saying out loud. And this is what makes it so painful. And so the layer of irony, the very freedom that allows the South Africans, the black South Africans, to march in their own streets today was paid for, in part, by the very countries whose citizens are now being driven out of those streets. Imagine. Let's talk a little bit about history. When Nelson Mandela and members from his political party, the African National Congress, ANC, were branded as terrorists by apartheid South Africa and later by the Western governments, America, it was West Africa that refused to look away. Nelson Mandela and his group were on the same level as Osama bin Laden. And I know Nelson Mandela and his group didn't bomb no building, allegedly. Yeah, they didn't do any of that. But that's how the Western world and the apartheid South Africa deemed, they branded Nelson Mandela. Why they looked at Nelson Mandela as a terrorist and the members of the ANC as terrorists, guess what was happening? Nigeria, and several other West African countries created what is they created this Mandela tax. This was money from civil servants, market women, school children, ordinary Nigerians voluntarily giving up a slice of their income for years to fund the liberation struggle, raising tens of millions of dollars through a fund called the Southern African Relief Fund for the liberation of Black South Africa, right? Nigeria. And, we're using the word volunteer a little loosely. I'm sure there were maybe one or two people who were like, I'm not doing it. But for the most part, the fact that a government could say, we're going to put a tax together for somebody's freedom. And I don't know if you guys honestly know what was happening in the early 60s in Africa. 1960 was known as the year for Africa, the year of Africa. Because why? There were so many countries in Africa who were declaring independence from their colonizers. And Nigeria was one of those countries, I think in 1960, was it? Correct me if I'm wrong. So these countries had their own struggle going on, but through it all, they were still determined to help South Africa. Imagine. So Nigeria raised money. They helped. They actually created a special committee within the UN called the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid in 1963, and they chaired that for years. So they pushed the Commonwealth for sanctions, and when the Western powers were still quietly doing business, they were there pushing the Commonwealth and saying, we need to put sanctions on some of these countries, some of these businesses, and of course against South Africa. Ghana and Nigeria also used their seats at the Organization of African Unity, or AU, and the United Nations, the UN, to push the world towards economic isolation of the apartheid regime. And West African nations were the loudest voices calling for boycotting South Africa, period. That's what was happening in West Africa. Now, let me tell you about my country, Liberia. I'm always a little biased, but here I'm going to give you straight facts. And this is why I love Liberia. This is one of the reasons why I just love Liberia and her history. So you have Liberia. What we did in 1960, well, okay, let's say this. In 1962, when Nelson Mandela actually slipped out of South Africa to go on a secret tour of the continent, he was trying to rally support for armed struggle. He went to Liberia, and President William Tubman at the time gave him funds for the resistance, give him a place to stay, to hide out, and also give him a passport. Because again, Nelson Mandela was deemed a terrorist. He couldn't get a passport in South Africa. So Liberia actually gave him a passport so he can move around. You know who else gave him a passport? Ethiopia. Ethiopia gave him a passport under a different name so he can be able to move around and rally support for the ANC to fight apartheid. Liberia also, this story about Nelson Mandela living in Liberia, people talk about it freely because some of the people who were there, they're still alive, and they talk about this. But anyway, so Liberia, in addition to giving him a passport, to giving him a safe haven in Liberia, to giving him funds for the resistance, Liberia also challenged South Africa's illegal grip on Namibia directly at the United Nations. So imagine, y'all know how far West Africa is from the southern part of Africa, where you have South Africa and Namibia. So South Africa wasn't just doing anything within the country of South Africa. They actually took the nonsense to Namibia. Another rabbit hole we need to go down. So Liberia is at the UN kind of challenging South Africa and how it was illegal for them to be up in Namibia. Now, in the 1960s, Liberia stood beside Ethiopia and took South Africa to the International Court of Justice itself. Yes, Liberia and Ethiopia. Those were the first nations on this earth. The first nations. Those two countries were the first nation on this earth to drag the apartheid government in front of a global court over its treatment of human beings. The case, of course, was dismissed years later due to a technicality, but the attempt by these two countries did what it was meant to do. It forced the world to look at apartheid in the face. Liberia also opened its universities and its borders to young South Africans and the ANC exiles who had nowhere else to go. Can you imagine that? Taxing your own people while they're going through their own struggle, their poverty, but they're taxing the people to fund somebody else's freedom, only for their grandchildren to be the ones now told to pack up and leave. So, here's where I land. To every Nigerian, to every Ghanaian, to every Ethiopian, to every Malawian, to every Liberian, and every African living in fear in South Africa right now, we see you. We see you, brothers and sisters. This is not okay, and it is not new. You are not imagining it. To the South African government, condemning something is not protection. Your statements are not safety. The continent that carry you to freedom is asking you to say out loud and without hedging that this must end now. And to all of us listening, whether this is a bigger problem for one country's politics. This is about I am because we are. I know you guys know that statement. It's more than a phrase on the wall. Apartheid taught Africans to fear and compete with each other. Every time we let that fear win, something died in 1994 gets to win twice. We are not done watching. Continue to show up fully, to speak boldly, to love deeply, to live intentionally. We are not done speaking.